Hello there, me again. This time not talking about Transformers or Marvel Comics, but instead talking about Doctor Who. Because late last year, as part of the 50th anniversary, you may have noticed it was 50th anniversary of Doctor Who last year. We did a very low-key, minor celebration for it. I started to watch the entire series in chronological order from the start. The first time I've ever done that, even though I have seen all the stories before because of the way the VHSs and DVDs and UK Gold have been sort of organised. I've never sat down and done the entire series in one go, including the recons of the missing episodes, of course, most of which you can find on YouTube, done by Loose Cannon. They're absolutely extraordinarily well done, especially with stories like Massacre, where there's such little visual material for it. But what I thought we'd do now, I am doing YouTube videos, as I finish each of the Doctors, I'll do a little video about them and how my thoughts of them change by watching them in order and in sequence. I'm currently coming up towards the end of John Pertwee's time, but I'm going to go back to try and imagine what I thought towards the end of last year when I finish off William Hartnell and talk about the very first Doctor. There he is, in case you've forgotten. He actually looks more like Richard Hartnell, I think, than William Hartnell. But there he is, the very first Doctor, the old grandfatherly one. I think of all the Doctors, except possibly Mr. Eccleston, he's the one where the behind-the-scenes events of the time he was in the show really colour the perception of him, and often get talked about a lot more than his actual adventures and the character of the Doctor during this time do. It's of course very well documented that William Hartnell was ill and got increasingly ill during his time on the show. I'm not even going to try and pronounce the name of the illness he had. I would just trip over that quite badly, but it was a hardening of the artery. See, I can barely even say that word, so it's like I'm not trying to come up with medical jargon. Which had an effect on his memory, which in the very strenuous circumstances of recording a 25-minute episode in basically one night, one a week, for most of the year. That wasn't good for him. So all these stories about his dodged lines, increasingly angry attitude, as the realities of the illness start to affect him, his supposed racism and homophobia and anti-Semitism. A man with a lot of issues, depending on which of his co-stars you talk to, but telling most of the really bad stories about his behaviour to come from his later companions, points where the stress of the role and his deteriorated health were beginning to affect him more. Really, his co-stars, everyone up to Peter Purvis, generally does have mostly good things to say about him, even if there are still a couple of funny stories there. William Hartnell, perception of this old dodgy man, probably reinforced by the fact that if anyone has seen just one William Hartnell story, it's going to be an unearthly child. The very first one, where he is probably his most stern and serious and dark, which sort of adds to a perception of how the actor is seen as well. But even that is also how any actor stepping into the role of the first Doctor over years since has sort of took it. Richard Hartnell played it that way. In the bits of An Adventure in Time and Space, David Bradley played it that way. And as much as I don't mind the first Doctor of the Five Doctors, and as much as I think David Bradley's performance as Hartnell himself was brilliant, that isn't a fair representation of the character. So perhaps in Bradley's case, of course, he's 20 years older than William Hartnell was, so it's understandable that he would be a little more frail and uncertain in the scenes in An Adventure in Time and Space when he was recreating the performance, especially as the drama they picked the bits. That's slightly unfairly where Hartnell was at his worst in the original show. That bit of a Web Planet. Who's going to get that right? Even the best actor in the world would just say, this shit, what am I saying? But none of that is true to what Hartnell is actually like. There is an energy to him, a bounce to him. Especially after he settles down, after his first few stories, he starts to be more humanised. He's literally jumping all over the screen, giggling like a maniac. There's an infectious fun to the character and an energy to him that is mesmerising. You could see why he was so popular. He is like at his best, he's like a volcano at the point of eruption, or a porn-sized cock at the point of ejaculation. And I will dare you now to watch either a William Hartnell story or a porn film without one of those two, the other image coming into your head the next time you do that. He's fantastic. Completely unlike the other Doctors, of course. It's largely a style of performance that was never attempted again, because Patrick Troughton's reinvention of art, which I'll talk about in my next video, was so successful in and of itself as well. Which does make Hartnell stand out and seem very odd. Even more so than Eccleston does, with his sort of working class northern performance. Yes, that was my impression of Christopher Eccleston. That is why I am the new John Cultural, but only less annoying. But there's so much vitality in Hartnell's performance, even with the fluffed lines. There are very, very few times during his era where he actually seems genuinely frail and uncertain of himself, except in circumstances where the script demands it. Usually he's at his weakest in the science fiction stories. You ask him to talk about his reacting vibrator, he clearly has no idea what the hell he's saying. And perhaps you can see he's slightly more restrained in his third year, where of course he was having to deal with a producer who wanted to get rid of him, which sort of isn't really touched upon in An Adventure in Time and Space. But John Wiles, who was oddly absent from that movie, even though he would be the perfect villain for a biography of William Hartnell, he was very keen to get rid of him. And indeed pride in the Celestial Toymaker, when Hartnell was made invisible. The original plan was to change him there when he got brought back. To have Michael Gough just change his appearance. Luckily they didn't go down that route and did the eventual regeneration in a much more mysterious and open-ended way. But I suppose from Michael Gough's point of view, he would have really liked that regular work, having to come back every 3 years and change the actor for them. And what I love about Hartnell is all these facets to his character. In fact, he has a character arc, an evolution, where, especially with Ian and Barbara, in those first stories when they're brought together, and Ian is very much the traditional lead of the series at that point, the more usual young male action hero, and the Doctor is more a not quite a sideline character, and he does fairly quickly come to prominence, because obviously of the positive feedback to what Hartnell's doing. And in fact, Hartnell himself wanted to soften the character and make him more integral. The rivalry between Ian and the Doctor and Barbara, and they're coming together sort of over the first 3 or 4 stories and becoming a team that is so well merged by over really the course of the first year. They become friendlier, the Doctor becomes softer, he becomes funnier. By the end of that very first season, you have a fantastic, well put together team with genuine character development, genuine arc for them that carries on into the second season. By the time you get to the Romans, when Ian and Barbara are blatantly shagging each other senseless, it's a family. It's a TV family. The weak link initially is Susan. Carol Ann Ford, never been a particular fan of her acting, and she's not helped by inconsistent material, often being written wildly from sort of super sinister, mysteriously powerful alien, which she doesn't really know how to play, or just a screaming kid, which she can play slightly better, but is less interesting and be a bit shrill of ears. And also in her returns in Big Finish in more recent years, while sort of being more seasoned actors has helped many of the other weaker companions sort of solidify themselves in the audios. Carol Ann Ford and alongside Deborah Watling are probably the only two who have shown no real improvement and are still just about as annoying as they were on television. Though your mileage may vary on that. But Vicky, much better when she comes in at the start of the second season. A lot more fun, a lot more likeable, and you have a great team there. And it's when you've watched all their adventures all the way through, when Ian and Barbara leave towards the end of the second season, it's genuinely touching and heartbreaking. After that, the companions get a bit more variable. Peter Purvis is great, and as Hartnell is becoming iller, and as they are trying to find ways of doing the show without him, it really even more so than Ian was, Peter Purvis becomes the lead. He carries a lot of the weight of the series during his year on the show. Most obviously the Massacre, where the Doctor isn't in it. But the Celestial Toymaker, he carries a lot, virtually all of that. He carries most of the arc as well. He's the one giving the big speeches defending humanity, more than the Doctor. So it's Peter Purvis is an absolutely essential part of that third year, making it work. But then you've got Dodo. Nobody likes or probably even cares that much about Dodo. In fact, the books most of their time doing horrible things to her. And the actress is pretty much the only person involved with 60s Doctor Who still have absolutely nothing to do with it at all. And then you've got those sort of temporary companions where they're deciding what the hell they're doing with the show. Sarah Kingdom gets a lot of attention because she's played by a mildly famous actress and was killed horrifically, but the character's just a bit dull, really. They're sort of supposedly aiming for Kathy Gale style thing, but never quite convinces me. Maybe if she'd done more, she would have gone better. But the sort of killing her brother, becoming a sidekick, but still a very stiff and slightly unnaturally performed sidekick, it never quite rings true. But despite all that I've just said, the third season is my favourite of Hartnell's 3 years, and that's sort of easy to say when so much of it doesn't exist. So you can sort of perhaps cover a lot of production and acting problems with your imagination when you're watching the recons, and it's very possible that recons improve a lot on stories just by the absence of moving images. But I love the variety of that third year. It's slightly bonkers, again, because of the behind-the-scenes problems, but in such a short space of time, you can have the Massacre, you can have the Daleks' Master Plan, you can have the Gunfighters. People who do not love the Gunfighters make me sad. It's a period of wild, insane invention, and I do think the Daleks' Master Plan is the best of the Hartnell Dalek stories as well. To be honest, it doesn't have much competition. And the Daleks themselves in the 60s always look great, better than they do in any of the 70s stories, and pretty much in the 80s as well. Mainly because the props are new then, they get very battered as the years go on. But the Daleks has a lot of paddiness. There's like what feels like an entire episode, people jumping over a small cliff. Dalek Invasion of Earth has iconic visuals, but is also very badly directed by Richard Martin, as is The Chase, which doesn't even have the advantage of impressive visuals. I mean, probably the best bit of The Chase is the fight with mechanoids, and that's the Daleks fighting midget robots who don't talk properly. It shouldn't be the best part of the story. I mean, the second best part is Morton Dill. Controversial, that's what I think. The Daleks' Master Plan, thanks to Douglas Campbell's direction, thanks to all the problems that are making the series very difficult to make at the time, it's just brilliantly all over the place, has a lot of invention, has some fantastic, memorable images, if you could say that about a story that doesn't mostly exist anymore, and it's just what I would absolutely love to be able to see all of. Every time some more turns up of it, it's surprising how well it is made. I think that's why Wobbit definitely does work better with video rather than recons, because you wouldn't think it was that impressive. If you were just making a recon based on the audio of the second episode, you wouldn't think there'd be all those fantastic little details that turned out to be in there when it was recovered. Mavic Chen using his pen in a weird way, the delegates dancing, it's just gorgeous stuff. The Massacre, which is a strong contender for the best 1960s Doctor Who story. I mean, because there's so few pictures from it, that would be brilliant to be recovered. I think that would be quite extraordinary, especially as Paddy Russell was always a very good director on the show, despite what Tom Baker may have thought in later years. But yeah, that third year, despite the behind-the-scenes problems, despite Hartnell's increasing visible difficulties, I would say is his best. Even though towards the end, I like the War Machines. Not a lot of people do. I think it's great to see with that environment. Yes, there's a bit where he gets mistaken for Jimmy Savile, which is slightly unfortunate now. But I think it's a good fun story, even though it doesn't really make any sense whatsoever. Even the basic stuff, how did that tramp get a front page news story on his death? But the Smugglers sort of shows how historical stories are going to be a little less interesting during the brief period that remains for them, and just be sort of romps. And the 10th Planet, Planet's not very good. I like the original Cybermen. I like the Visible Face. I think that's a shame that something was ever really brought back, even though they sort of do slightly attempt it with the Earthshock version. But they just... the attempt sort of halfway through turned them into actual would-be world conquerors, rather than just these logical, slightly odd creatures. It doesn't work when they're threatening to blow up the world. They just seem silly. Especially when the cyber leader, Zeng, is it? I think he's called, I can't remember now off the top of my head, is going around interview people with his little microphone. I think the best description of that scene I've ever seen was when someone said it was like a slightly less evil episode of the Jeremy Kyle show. So Hartnell doesn't perhaps go out as good as he could have, even though Regeneration itself, well, they didn't call it that at the time, is probably the best achieved one of the original series. Despite the relative primitiveness of technique, it's terrifying, it's scary. When you watch it in context at the end of 3 years, where William Hartnell, up to that point, he has not been playing the first Doctor, he's just the Doctor, he's just Doctor Who. To have him suddenly just fall down and die without explanation and then turn into somebody else, even knowing the entire rest of the show, that is still an extraordinarily mind-blowing moment. So at least the last 2 minutes of the 10th Planet sends it out on a high. But overall, I thought William Hartnell was more consistently better than I remembered. I thought there was more character development across his stories than I remembered. Peter Purvis undergoes a great deal of evolution as well, even though that does end with Massacre, which is the point where he should have left the show. I'm glad he didn't, because he's essentially essential to the success of the next few stories that follow. But sort of he walks out the TARDIS, pissed off with the Doctor, should have come back. He does, and the character's never quite the same after that. But it's still a great story, though. And one thing that annoyed me about An Adventure in Time and Space is the way it portrayed that last scene of the Massacre as if Hartnell was completely and utterly buggering it up and off his senses, when quite famously that's a speech he got exactly right. Specifically because the producers butted him up before they had to record it, much like how Sidney Newman did to the Doctor in An Adventure in Time and Space. So I'm all for dramatic licence and all, but I thought that was very unfair on Hartnell to make him more infirm in one of his best moments than he was actually in reality. But no, really enjoyed Hartnell's time. Enjoyed pretty much all of their very few stories that have no redeeming features whatsoever. I mean, there are a couple of where the execution fails slightly. You sort of watch a space museum and you realise that nobody makes it realises it's supposed to be funny. The whole thing is a send-up of stupid alien monster dictators conquering a planet for no reason, and absolutely nobody involved in the show gets that at all. The Keys of Marinus is the first of many examples of Terry Nation having no idea how a BBC television budget works and just writing any old craziness, with often hilarious results. I love Yartek though. Bring back Yartek. They brought the macro back. I want Yartek back as well. But mostly, everything stands up. There are some very nice surprises in there as well. The Savages is a much better story than I remembered, and as much as Peter should have left during the massacre, that's a pretty good send-off for him as well. They get to be king of the planet at the end. And Galaxy 4 was a surprise when we finally got to see a full episode of that, where you can sit there and go, this is so much better than we'd have ever guessed. Incredibly well directed. Though it does have, yes, that bit where a grid comes down and the Doctor goes, this is unmovable, whilst it's wobbling back and forth as he shakes it. And it also has that strange bit where Hartnell seems to decide to start destroying the set in the middle of a scene for no reason. He just grabs bits off the wall. But otherwise, though, I would love to see the rest of that story as well, because I think that would be unexpectedly surprising. Overall, though, very pleased with watching Hartnell get to revisit his time on the show. I think he's a very underrated Doctor. I think it's a shame he never got to return to the role again in more than that very brief part of the Three Doctors. In that, he's actually very good as well. You can tell he is reading his lines off cue cards, but his very final performance, there's still the authority behind the reading of the lines. There's that little touch of humour, and his last couple of lines, knowing that he died soon after, are very touching and much, much better than his exit from the 10th planet with thank you, keep warm. So overall, First Doctor, enjoyed his time more than I expected to, and I did re-evaluate him upwards. What will I think of Patrick Troughton? Well, you'll have to come back in a few weeks to find out. Possibly a slightly less rambly video there. I've been slightly all over the place, but hopefully it's been slightly enjoyable. If you've not seen any William Hartnell and have made it this far, and would like to sample some of his era, obviously An Unearthly Child is a good place to start, my first one, because that first episode is brilliant. But if you want a better feel for the character of the First Doctor as he solidified, my recommendation would be The Time Meddler. Fun story, because Peter Purvis properly joins the cast in it. It's a good introductory story to the period as well. And Hartnell is huge fun because he gets to play off an actor he obviously respects and admires in Carry On star Peter Butterworth. And the scenes between the two of them are brilliant. And I think, in terms of one story that exists, if you were only to watch one, see William Hartnell at his best, that would be The Time Meddler. So, hopefully, I'll be doing another one fairly soon for Patrick Troughton. But until then, go off, get out your reactive vibrators, and have some fun. Be seeing you.